Something appeared strange in the air that dreary morning in Rome. The breeze did not penetrate despite the windows being open. The most adored man of religion made one more plea inside a quiet room while the Plaza de San Pedro's bells rang out earlier than normal. He made no requests for speeches or gold. He didn't request large audiences. He didn't ask for comforting remarks. All he requested was a reunion. A straightforward gesture with a silent being. A four-legged companion who silently understood him every time. And something happened right then, just a few seconds before the last goodbye. Something that those who saw it would find heartwarming, and that you will now be aware of. I encourage you to like and subscribe to the channel if stories like these resonate with you. That enables us to keep sharing soul-stirring moments. I appreciate you being here. The sky was cloudy in Rome that morning. No storm was announced by the clouds. However, the Vatican as a whole was aware that something profound was going to occur. No, there was no hurry or commotion. The only sound was that of the bells, which sounded a little more slowly as though they were requesting quiet. The man who led millions with his voice but now favored silence slept in one of the most guarded rooms, reclining under light covers and with his hands entwined. There was little more from the Holy Father. His eyes were still closed, but not because he was not there, but rather because he was thinking. He was surrounded by reverently watching doctors, servants, and religious people. Despite their diminutive size, each gesture held the weight of eternity. Then, in between prayers, he gently opened his eyes, turned to face a sister nearby, and murmured, "Bring Balthazar," in a sad yet holy voice. For a moment, the sister was immobilized. The others exchanged perplexed glances. "Balthazar?" In a quiet voice, a cardinal asked. Was he a priest? A guest? However, the Pope's eyes were unmistakable. The devoted friend of four, Balthazar was a dog who had been with him for many years. A medium-sized white dog with a huge heart and a submissive gaze. After the Holy Father started to become ill, Balthazar left the Vatican. After being brought to Castel Gandolfo, the animal was cared for by Sister Dominica, an elder sister who fed him, petted him, and spoke to him in gentle tones akin to prayers. However, the dog never repeated the action. He slept next to an elderly sotana, did not play, ate poorly, and occasionally let out a low cry as if he were experiencing an absence he could not identify. It was necessary to go back a long way before the Vatican, before the masses, before the speeches, before the white habits, in order to comprehend that plea, both simple and deep. Returning to Argentina was essential back when Jorge Mario was a young boy frolicking around the streets of Buenos Aires with pink cheeks and inquisitive eyes. Jorge, who was raised by modest and devout parents, heard a saying that he would always remember. Jorge, God's breath is present in all living things. He gained respect for ants, birds, cats, and most importantly, dogs, as a result of that instruction. He touched those who were afraid of grown-ups, sat on the pavement, shared his snack with stray pets, and loved them. He once came home with a dog in his arms and muddy knees, according to his mother. In the seminary, already an adult, he was shaking and could not leave him alone, Mom. Even as an archbishop, Jorge never refrained from showing sympathy to an abandoned animal and was well known for feeding the dogs that surrounding the monastery. In his soul, love and faith always walked hand in hand. As a result, nobody was shocked when he became pope and was known as Francisco, the saint who adored all animals. It was therefore not surprising when a white-furred dog showed up in the Vatican's inner garden one day and, for no apparent reason, lay at the Pope's feet as though he knew him already. Francisco merely grinned, stooped, and muttered, "Balthazar." Returning to the present, it became imperative to find Balthazar. Immediately, a car was dispatched to Castel Gandolfo. Sister Dominica cradled the puppy in her arms inside the car, lovingly stroking his head. The driver murmured softly, "He knows, my son, he knows." Balthazar, who hadn't eaten in days, shuddered now, but not because he was afraid. He seemed to know where he was headed because his gaze was concentrated on the road. Everyone looked to be running out of time. Vital indicators in the Pope's room were steady but brittle. The delicate breath sounded almost like a plea that was murmured. Without hesitation, Balthazar got out of the automobile when it arrived. He didn't snarl. The strap was not pulled by him. He simply walked as though there was a higher power directing every step. The Vatican's hallways seemed to recognize his small legs. One of the guards stepped. The sisters bowed their heads and Balthazar paused in front of the room's door. No one was certain what he would do. No one knew how much time remained. When the door finally opened, however, everyone present realized something. The reunion was on the horizon. A man and his dog weren't the only ones involved. It was between two spirits who had possibly been made for that same purpose and had wandered side by side. Balthazar moved as though he was aware. He walked steadily but firmly. Neither dread nor anxiousness was present. The sound of his legs seemed familiar to the halls of the Shinto sect II Vatican. Time seems to have shifted to a different frequency. More serious, slower. For a brief time it appeared as though the dog was wearing an invisible sotana as he walked with such respect amid the Swiss guards. He paused when he reached the door. Not because I'm afraid. As though he were requesting permission, he paused. As though he realized that something holy was taking place within. When Sister Domenica touched the pickpocket, her hands shook. She glanced at one of the guards, who only gave her a small nod of permission. The door then opened. It was quiet inside. A white curtain filtered in the light. The Pope was still in bed, his head cocked to one side, his eyes closed. His expression was calm and his fingers were on his chest. No bark came from Balthasar. He didn't flee. He just walked in. Those in attendance gazed at the animal. Everyone seemed to have momentarily forgotten that there was a dog present. Something larger was present. Ancestral. A spiritual thing. Balthasar walked over to the bed. He moved to the side. After examining the Pope's face, he took a seat. He was still there, his gaze locked on the man he loved so dearly, his ears dropping slightly. He seemed to be anticipating a sign, a phrase, or a sigh. However, nothing took place. In private, a nurse dabbed at a tear in the corner of her eye. Unable to control the emotion, one of the cardinals quietly withdrew. Everything was both profound and incredibly simple. Balthasar remained motionless as the minutes went by. He served as a guardian of love, a kind of sentry. The Pope's fingers moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, as though he were reaching for something he had not yet reached. He didn't open his eyes, though. Balthasar took note. He bent forward. He reclined next the bed. Near the Pope's hand, he placed his muzzle on the sheet. The gesture was sufficient even though there was still no contact. It seemed as though an embrace had taken place in the world, hidden from innocent emotions. Sister Domenica stepped back. This was not a moment to be seen, she realized. At a distance, it could be felt. Outside, the sun started to disappear behind the basilica's dome. The sky was tinted orange gold and Rome, whatever that private moment, went on with its hurried cadence. Time had stopped inside, though. Balthasar's eyes were closed. The Pope let out a barely perceptible breath. Not a sound. No word. Just the breathing sound of time. At that moment, an almost imperceptible event occurred. For a time, the Pope opened his eyes. He remained silent. But no one present was certain of what he murmured since his lips twitched. Balthasar's head came up. He studied the face of the Pope. He cocked his head a little. He moved cautiously forward as though any abrupt movement could shatter the delicate moment. However, there was no kiss. No interaction. Not quite yet. Just proximity. Existence. Complete respect. Messages from all over the world were delivered to the Pope's personal secretary in the next hall. Embassies. Leaders in religion. Politicians. Devoted. Everyone is inquiring about the Pope's health. However, nobody was aware of what was taking place at that very moment. A canine. A space. And between the ground and the sky, a man. In the meantime, Balthasar's thoughts was plagued by a persistent recollection. If canines actually do remember, similar to us, perhaps they recall the body, with the odor, with the spirit. He recalled Francisco's hurried movements in the garden. The pause-filled, low voice. With the same compassion, the caressing hands knew how to bless and caress. The Pope merely observed him as someone who thanked God for being able to recognize the beauty in simplicity, recalling the days they spent together under the shade of an olive tree. And he was there now, firm, devoted, there. Time went by. The room's lights were turned down. Balthasar remained still. He stayed there for hours, like a sentinel with 4 legs, like an angel with white hair. And it seemed like folks started to notice something was going on that evening, that the calls were no longer answered by the Pope, that his soul was gradually coming together. The steps in the Vatican courtyard sounded deserted. At the top of the tower, a slight breeze caused the bells to chime, and other pious people started lighting candles in front of the picture of San Francisco for no apparent reason. The atmosphere was solemnly serene. At last Balthasar entered the room and lay down beside the bed. The stillness grew increasingly poignant, but there was still no farewell. Consequently, night fell. Francisco was on his back. Wake up, Balthasar. The planet in suspension. What do you think about Pope Francis's affinity for animals? Do you believe that he set a good example for people? Please share your thoughts in the comments section. That night, the Vatican did not sleep. The corridors were still lit, but they were gentle, like unseen candles. Whispers were kept to a minimum and cautious steps were taken. Prayers with hearts open and eyes closed. It was as though everyone was aware that a period was ending without anyone letting them know. There was a sense of reverence in the Pope's room. Balthasar remained rooted to the bed. His snout rested on the white sheet, but his torso touched the cold marble floor where he had selected a spot on the left. Calmly, as though listening to the beat of the man who gave him his name and welcome, he breathed. The Pope remained silent. He kept his eyes shut. There may occasionally be a minor finger contraction. Occasionally, a sigh that seemed to be filled with recollections. He appeared to be suspended between the present and the future, as though he were already sailing between two universes. It was now a presence rather than a man. A living narrative coming to a close before becoming an enduring memory. The Vatican had received a letter hours before. It came from the Assisi Franciscan community. A handwritten note, brief. We know that Francisco will be among the birds, dogs, trees, and everyone he knew how to tenderly adore if he departs tonight. He will be known for seeing God in all living things in addition to speaking of him. One of the assistants read the letter quietly. At the conclusion of the reading, Balthasar oddly raised his head. He remained still, as though he had heard and was anticipating those words. Two nuns were making a bouquet with white flowers and olive branches in the adjacent hall. The decision was symbolic rather than artistic. The olive branch stood for both the promise of life after the deluge and peace, the conviction that there will always be a fresh start. For the dog, however, there was merely the lack of sound and no symbolism. Additionally, the existence of an unseen force that seemed to sense every hair. The night sky outside started to turn bluish. The first hesitant rays of morning pushed the darkness softly, yet it was still dawn. It seemed as though the globe was bravely getting ready for what lay ahead. Balthasar stayed on his back. He once carefully stood up, turned to face the bed, and sniffed the pillow belonging to the Pope. Then, without making any noise or barking, he went back to his spot. The guardian was him. In the meantime, an elderly woman lit a candle in front of a picture of San Francisco in Buenos Aires, where it all started. He felt something in his chest, but he wasn't sure why. "I'm going," he said simply, and without hurry, a tear fell. Someone came into the room. Recently arrived from Latin America, the young priest had met the Pope in person a few months prior. He moved gently closer, knelt in a room corner, and silently prayed. Balthasar turned to face him and watched him for a few long moments. Then his gaze shifted to the bed. "I had never seen a dog examined so intently," the priest would write later. He seemed to already be aware of what no one else could say. Nevertheless, he waited there, silently. Dawn was coming. Some of the faithful started to assemble outside for prayer. Slowly, a spontaneous chain of faith was taking shape. Rosaries between the fingers, lit candles, and whispered words against the wind. There was affection, but no formal statement. Love forewarns. The Pope breathed softly and rhythmically inside the room. He appeared to listen even if his eyes did not open any longer. He appeared to be far away but present. Balthasar stood up once more. He moved forward 2 paces. The Pope's right hand was resting on his chest as he snugged it. He remained still. In that gesture, time seemed to have stopped. One of the assistants put his whistle-wielding hand to his mouth. But nobody was brave enough to move. The quiet spoke louder than any prayer at that moment. The quiet was intense and full of tears that burned in the chest but did not fall. For the final time, Balthasar went to sleep. His body stuck to the sheet, now closer. He stopped moving and closed his eyes. Outside, the Basilica of San Pedro's dome was touched by the sun's first rays. The sky was clear. Rome appeared to have paused for a moment, and the breeze was gentle. A few seconds, not realizing that something holy was going to occur in that exact moment. Now, however, that would not be revealed. Francisco and Balthasar's farewell and that of a man and his dog did not actually occur as depicted in the films. It was more silent, more eternal, more real, and yet more inexplicable all at once. When the bells started to ring, the sun had already risen. It wasn't a hurried call or a hint of alertness. There was a calm, constant touch that sounded like a bronze prayer. Time had changed, as the Basilica of San Pedro's bells indicated. It was quiet in the Pope's room. Francisco's calm face and white sheet were illuminated by the lovely light that came in through the open curtains. He had left quietly. No one was agitated. No last exaggerated sigh. There was a deep silence, a tiny relaxation of the fingers, and the assurance that a soul had come home at that precise instant. However, he wasn't by himself. There was Balthasar, still with his muzzle against the cloth, resting beside the bed. And he didn't get up until the bells started to ring. The dog walked 2 steps to the middle of the room, but no one called him or gave him instructions. After taking a look around, he lay with his body facing the window, seemingly watching and telling the world, "I stay here until I am at peace." Soon later, the Pope's body was ready, dressed simply as he usually preferred, and holding a small wooden rosary that an African child had given him during a Vatican hearing. Balthasar, meantime, was led to an inner garden, where he sat and gazed up at the sky without moving or crying. When someone tried to call him, he simply gazed and raised his eyes while his chest slowly rose and fell. Then everyone knew. The word got around like wildfire. This morning in 1900, Pope Francis passed away. The Vatican. People started to gather in crowds, and while some carried flowers, some just spoke quietly, others prayed, sung, and grieved. However, there was a profound, distinct, spiritual, and unexplainable feeling, as though the world had lost a friend or a father. Like a silent tide of suffering and desire, the news spread over the globe. According to the headlines, Pope Francis passed away this morning. However, it was an emptiness rather than merely news. Despite no formal announcement, the Plaza de San Pedro started to fill up that evening. As if led by an inner summons no one could fathom, faithful from all over the world started to show up. Candles were lighted, pictures were arranged, letters were left, and one picture started to repeat on its own. Animals around San Francisco de Asís. People seemed to be saying, "He's gone." He did, however, leave us a love for all things created. The rosary-holding hands, the sorrowful gaze, and the slow, deferential movements were all captured on camera. There was quiet. There was no chaos. There was no hopelessness. Balthasar, the devoted dog that spent the final hours with the Pope, was silent in one of the inner gardens during that time. Instead of eating or playing, he simply gazed up into the sky as if he were waiting for a signal. Some tourists claimed to have witnessed him make his way to the Vatican's iron gates, pause in front of the throng, and then lie down there with his head lowered, gazing at the basilica. People moved aside and made room without a word, and the world appeared to comprehend. Although there was no coffin or altar, there was a sign of fidelity, love, and respect. A woman put flowers on the pavement where Jorge Mario Bergoglio used to play as a youngster in the neighborhood where he grew up in Buenos Aires. "He always loved dogs," she said, and now one of them stayed to tell us. Images of Balthasar circulated via newspapers, live broadcasts, social media, and other platforms as a representation of an unfathomable love. The most poignant silence in history was that of Balthasar, the buddy who remained till the very end. The final act of a pope who espoused the idea of limitless love. Candles with images of Francisco and animals were lit in Manila, Lisbon, Bogotá, Rome, Maputo, Santiago, and Quebec. That night, some were more compassionate with their own dogs. The world bid farewell to more than just a pope. It bid farewell to a spirit that demonstrated through words and deeds that love entails treating everything with respect. An interesting thing occurred that early in the morning. Unexpectedly, a white dove landed in the window alféizar of Balthasar's sleeping quarters. The dog cautiously lifted his head from his resting position, glanced at the bird, and then turned his attention to the sky. For long, they remained in this position, silent and still. And a nun who was observing from a distance murmured softly, "I believe he knew. I believe he understood Allah." The image of the dog and the dove became viral the following morning, and a phrase started to spread across many languages. Finally, Francisco was blessed with legs and silence. Balthasar now resides in retirement at a convent in the heart of Italy. According to the sisters, he is quiet but incredibly kind. He sleeps next to an old sotana and occasionally wakes up early to simply gaze at the sky, possibly anticipating a voice or realizing the presence of the one who has never left him. Pope Francis left humanity with a wealth of teachings. He discussed humility, fairness, and compassion. He imparted lessons about forgiveness, hope, and faith. One of the most exquisite, however, was the love for animals, the reverence for all living things, the knowledge that all creatures bear the breath of God, and the fact that animals, even in the absence of language, love more pure than many human hearts. That is holy. Francisco demonstrated that a dog can be more devoted than 1,000 speeches and more truthful than 1,000 lectures, and that no creature is too small to deserve love. He imparted knowledge to us not just verbally but also emotionally. Take a deep breath and keep in mind that animals are a part of the divine creation if the story touched you. Sometimes they perceive God before us and they feel, suffer, and love. Do you believe that animals are divinely blessed beings? That they, too, possess a soul, emotions, and the capacity for unconditional love? I would like to know. You're listening to us where in the world? Post it in the comments section. This message will be spread everywhere. If you were moved by this tale, please like it. Join us now if you haven't already subscribed. And to keep hearing fascinating tales like this, ring the bell. A brand new narrative is already waiting for you on the screen. Because the stories will continue to be told as long as there is love. Hugs.